120 years ago, sponge divers discovered a shipwreck off the tiny island of Antikythera in Greece. And what they found changed our understanding of human history.
For 1,224 years, the Antikythera shipwreck has been studied, surveyed, and picked over by every generation of archaeologists with the technology to reach it. The world thought the story was finished. The statues were catalogued, the mechanism was decoded, the wreck had given up its secrets. Among the treasure trove were marble statues, elegant vases, glistening jewelry, and ancient coins, and what looked to be a hunk of corroded metal that no one knew quite what to do with. Then, in 2024, a team went back down with equipment nobody had ever used at the site before. What they pulled off the seabed in the dark off Point Glyphadia is sitting in laboratories right now, and the language being used to describe it is not the language archaeologists use when they recognize what they are looking at. The wreck that killed them. 2 years before Stias bent over that lump, a fleet of Greek sponge divers from the island of Symi was riding out a storm off Antikythera, a small island in the strait between Crete and the Greek mainland. The waters there are deep, the currents are treacherous. Ships did not survive that strait without luck. The captain, Dimitrios Kondos, ordered a man named Elias Stadiatis to suit up and go down. Stadiatis descended to about 50 meters and surfaced raving. He was talking about a heap of corpses and horses on the seafloor. Kondos assumed his diver was hallucinating from nitrogen narcosis. He was wrong. What Stadiatis had actually seen was the cargo of a Roman-era merchant ship that had sunk sometime around 60 to 65 BC. The bronze and marble statues were so well preserved by the cold deep water that in the diver's confused first glimpse, they looked like bodies frozen on the seabed. Here is what nobody tells you about the recovery that followed. It killed people. For 2 years, the divers worked the wreck with helmet and hose equipment, heavy brass helmets, air pumped from the surface through rubber tubes. They had no understanding of decompression theory. None. They were going down to depths that should have been treated like surgery and treating them like fishing trips. 1 diver died. 2 others were permanently paralyzed. Eventually, Kondos called the operation off. The wreck still held artifacts. Everyone knew it. But the captain was not willing to bury any more of his men for ancient treasure. Think about what they had pulled up before he stopped. 2 years of work, 3 lives broken in the process, and a cargo that even in fragments would change what we knew about the ancient Mediterranean. Much of the wreck has been preserved, the wooden balustrades around the quarterdeck, the ropes for working the sails. In other seas, most of this wreck would not have survived. A floating treasury. The vessel that sank off Point Glyphadia on the island's northeastern coast was, based on the most recent archaeological analysis, one of the largest cargo ships of its era, 40 to 50 meters long. It is comparable to the largest Roman merchant vessels known from the period. 50 meters underwater, just off the Greek island of Antikythera, lie the remains of a merchant vessel that sank 2,000 years ago. A ship that big needed a substantial crew. It cost a fortune to build, a fortune to operate, a fortune to load. Whoever commissioned its final voyage was not some minor merchant moving olive oil. The cargo proved it. The 1900 to 1901 recovery brought up an astonishing collection of Greek art. The Antikythera Youth, a bronze statue of a young man, possibly depicting the hero Perseus or the god Paris, sits today in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens as one of the treasures of the Greek state. The Antikythera Philosopher, a marble portrait head, represents some of the finest Hellenistic portraiture that survives anywhere in the world. There were bronze warriors, marble horses, and smaller pieces by the dozens. This was a museum's worth of masterpieces, and most of them were already centuries old when the ship sank. Now, picture this. The amphorae recovered from the wreck were of Rhodian and Coan types, dating to the mid-1st century BC. Coins recovered later during Jacques Cousteau's brief dive at the site in 1976 refined the chronology further. The ship sank somewhere around 60 to 65 BC, which places it in a very specific and very violent historical moment. In 86 BC, the Roman general Sulla sacked Athens. The city had backed Mithridates VI of Pontus, Rome's enemy, and Sulla's punishment was deliberate and surgical. Athens was looted. 5 centuries of Greek artistic achievement were stripped from its temples and public squares and shipped to Rome. Many scholars believe the Antikythera ship was carrying part of that plunder. The statues, the luxury goods, the obvious wealth of the cargo, all of it is consistent with war booty being moved from the conquered Greek world to the homes and villas of wealthy Romans. Other scholars argue the cargo was a private collection assembled by some patron with deep pockets and a taste for Greek masterpieces. The argument has gone back and forth for decades. Both sides have evidence, neither side has won. Nobody disputes the value of what was on board. This was not a trade vessel, this was a floating treasury. And somewhere in that cargo, packed in a crate that nobody would think twice about, was the lump of bronze that Valerius Stius would clean off in 1902.
The impossible object. When Status saw the gears, the archaeological community did not know what to do with them. The technology was too advanced. It did not fit the narrative of ancient Greek achievement. We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object. It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine. So for decades, the mechanism was treated as a curiosity, interesting, unexplainable, a puzzle nobody could solve, so nobody really tried. Think about that for a second. They had in their hands the most sophisticated machine recovered from the ancient world, and they shelved it. Not because they were lazy, but because it broke their model of what the ancient world was supposed to have been. The Greeks were philosophers, sculptors, playwrights. They were not supposed to be precision engineers. So when something showed up that contradicted the story, the easiest move was to set it aside and focus on the statues that did fit. Serious analysis did not begin until the 1970s. Physicist Derek de Sola Price did the first detailed study using X-ray imaging. His work revealed that the mechanism was far more complex than the visible fragments suggested. Dozens of precisely machined gears were arranged in a configuration that looked astronomical. Price proposed that the device was a calculator, a machine for predicting the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. His reconstruction was incomplete, but it cracked the door open. The breakthrough came in 2005. Imagine Tony Freeth at Cardiff University working with Mike Edmonds and a team that had just been granted permission to image the mechanism fragments using cutting-edge X-ray computed tomography. The scans run, the images come back, and Freeth is staring at a screen showing inscriptions on the metal that have not been read in 2,000 years, inscriptions describing what the mechanism does, in its own words. The room must have been very quiet. What the scan showed was staggering. At least 30 bronze gears, precisely machined, teeth meshing at tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. The gear train implemented a sophisticated mathematical model of celestial mechanics. It predicted lunar and solar eclipses, tracked phases of the moon, and mapped the positions of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. One gear incorporated a pin and slot mechanism that reproduced the variable speed of the moon's orbit, a phenomenon called lunar anomaly that comes from the moon's elliptical path around Earth. The idea is that where the stars, the planets, the sun, and the moon are in the sky affects what happens to our lives. That insight would not be mathematically described in Europe until Johannes Kepler formulated his laws of planetary motion in the 17th century. The ancient Greeks had encoded Kepler's discovery into bronze gears 1,700 years before Kepler was born. Read that sentence again. Tony Freeth's 2021 paper in Scientific Reports proposed a complete reconstruction of the mechanism's front face, the display that would have shown the user the current state of the heavens. The reconstruction required over 60 gears working together. The mathematical models implemented in those gears were not supposed to exist in the ancient world. By any reasonable measure, the Antikythera mechanism is the most sophisticated piece of technology recovered from classical antiquity. Here's what nobody tells you about that fact. After the ship sank, after the mechanism settled in the cold, dark water off Point Glyphadia, no comparable device shows up in the European archaeological record for more than 1,000 years. The first mechanical clocks built in medieval European monasteries are crude by comparison. The first geared astronomical instruments produced by Islamic engineers, sophisticated as they were, did not match Antikythera's precision until the medieval period was nearly over. The mechanism was not just ahead of its time, it was ahead of every time that followed it for 14 centuries. So where are the others? Back to the wreck. That question is the reason this story does not end in 1902, or in 1976, or in any of the comfortable stopping points where most documentaries leave it. The wreck site sat largely undisturbed for 50 years after the sponge divers left.
Cousteau visited briefly in 1953 and returned in 1976, recovering additional artifacts and the coins that helped pin down the dating. But Cousteau was an explorer, not an archaeologist. His dives were fast. The wreck kept its secrets. The modern era of Antikythera archaeology began in 2012. Picture Brendan Foley standing on a boat off Point Glyphadia, leading the Return to Antikythera project, a collaboration between the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and the Woods Hole Oceanic Institution. He is bringing 21st century technology to a site that had been excavated with 19th century methods, advanced diving systems, underwater robots, and precision mapping. For the first time, the entire wreck site gets systematically surveyed and documented. What they find is not what anyone expected. The debris field is bigger than the record said. Artifacts are scattered across a wider area than the original divers ever explored. The ship had broken apart as it sank, distributing its cargo across multiple locations. The artifacts that emerged during the seasons from 2012 to 2014 included objects the 1900 divers had missed entirely: bronze fragments, marble pieces, and items suggesting that the original recovery had pulled up only a fraction of what the ship had been carrying. Then in 2014, the project deployed something nobody had ever used at an archaeological site before: the exosuit designed by Phil Newton of Newtco Research. Picture it, a 530-pound articulated metal suit, essentially a wearable submarine. It maintains surface pressure on the inside while the diver works at depth, which means no nitrogen absorption, no bends, and no decompression sickness. You're essentially inside of a pressure vessel, you're inside of a submarine, and that space is not compressible, so that's really the key with removing pressure. A diver inside it can work at 300 meters for hours and then ascend straight to the surface without spending half a day in decompression stops. For the first time since 1900, archaeologists could treat the Antikythera wreck like a land excavation. This is the moment to pause. If what you have heard so far is changing how you think about the ancient world, the next stretch is going to do it again, and the part after that is what the field is quietly arguing about behind closed doors. Subscribe so the next update reaches you when these analyses come out, because the publications are not done, and what is sitting in those laboratories right now is going to be news. Drop a comment with what you think the ship was carrying. War loot from Sula? A private collection? Something stranger? I want to see your guesses before the rest of this lands. Bones in the cargo. The 2022 season produced the most significant find since 1901, a marble head, approximately life-sized, recovered from the debris field. Analysis identified it as a depiction of Hercules, the Greek hero of the 12 labors. The head is of exceptional quality, consistent with the masterpieces recovered during the original excavation. The Hercules head confirmed something the modern surveys had been hinting at for a decade. The 1900 divers had not exhausted the wreck. Significant artifacts were still down there, undisturbed in the silt, waiting. The same season produced something else: human remains. Teeth and bone fragments were recovered from the wreck site. DNA analysis was conducted on the skeletal material, providing the first genetic information about the people who had been aboard the ship when it sank. They had found a human skeleton that's been buried under pottery shards and sand for 2 millennia. These were not the statues that Stadiades had once mistaken for corpses. These were actual human remains, passengers or crew, people who had gone down with the vessel 2,000 years ago. Their presence confirmed the obvious: when the ship sank, people died. Think about what that means. The Antikythera wreck has been studied for over a century as a story about objects, statues, bronzes, the mechanism. But somebody had been paid to load that cargo. Somebody had been hired to sail that ship. Somebody had been entrusted with delivering that floating treasury to whoever was waiting on the other end of the voyage. Those people died when the hull came apart in the strait. Until 2022, they were a footnote. Now they have teeth. Now they have bone. Now they have DNA. How many people and who they were remains unclear. A vessel of that size would have carried a substantial crew. If it was transporting valuable cargo to a wealthy patron, it might have carried passengers, guards, administrators, maybe even the patron himself. The DNA analysis is ongoing. The dead of the Antikythera wreck may yet be identified by their genetic signatures 2,000 years after they drowned. And then came 2024. The 2024 excavation. In May and June of 2024, a joint Greek and Swiss research team led by the University of Geneva and the Greek Ministry of Culture returned to the Antikythera wreck for an extended excavation season. They were not using helmet and hose. They were not using basic scuba. They were using a refined version of the exosuit with extended bottom times. Picture this scene: a diver inside 530 pounds of articulated metal, alone on the seabed off Point Glyphadia, working a section of debris that has been undisturbed for 2,000 years. The light is dim. The water is cold. Somewhere above, a research vessel is holding station, a tether running down into the dark. The diver lifts something out of the silt, something that does not look like anything in the catalog. Now think about who is in that suit. They have been trained for this their entire career. They know what statues look like. They know what amphorae look like. They know what coins look like. So when their hands close around something that does not match any of those categories, they know it right there on the seabed. Before any laboratory analysis, before any publication, they know.
What the team found has only been partially disclosed. The full publications are coming, but the public statements have already confirmed several developments that are reshaping how the field understands the wreck. First, the ship was bigger than previously understood. Structural analysis of the hull remains supports a vessel of 40 to 50 meters in length, placing it among the largest merchant ships of the Roman era. A ship that size could carry an enormous cargo. The artifacts pulled up over the last century may represent only a fraction of what was originally on board. Second, the team identified a separate debris field at a location away from the main wreck site. The ship had broken apart as it sank, possibly striking rocks, possibly overwhelmed by waves. Pieces of the cargo had scattered across a wider area than any previous excavation had reached. The separate debris field has not been fully excavated. What it contains, nobody yet knows. Third, new bronze fragments have been recovered that may belong to previously unknown statues. The 1900 recovery brought up remarkable bronzes, but also numerous fragments that could not be matched to complete figures. The 2024 finds expand that catalog with pieces that do not match anything currently identified. Fourth, the detail that has drawn the most attention from specialists, the research team recovered objects they described in carefully worded public statements as requiring further analysis to determine function and significance. Read that phrasing again slowly. Archaeologists know how to identify statues, they know coins, they know the standard categories of ancient artifacts. When a research team declines to categorize something and instead describes it as requiring further analysis, they are signaling one thing: the object does not fit standard categories. The question no one asked. So here is the question that has been circulating quietly among specialists since the 2024 season ended. Was the Antikythera mechanism actually unique? The mechanism's sophistication has always seemed anomalous. Ancient texts describe astronomical devices, but nothing in the surviving literature approaches the complexity of what Stice cleaned off in 1902. The mechanism appears to represent a technological tradition that left almost no other trace in the archaeological record. That has been the official position of the field for over a century. One mechanism, singular, a miracle of ancient engineering that somehow left no siblings in the dirt. That anomaly has had three traditional explanations. Maybe the mechanism was a one-of-a-kind creation, the work of a single genius whose innovations died with him. Ancient technology often developed in isolated pockets dependent on individual craftsmen, whose knowledge was not systematically preserved. When the craftsman died, the knowledge died with him. Whole technical traditions disappeared this way in the ancient world. There is no reason to assume mechanical engineering was an exception. Maybe similar mechanisms existed and were recycled for their bronze. Metal was valuable in the ancient world. Sophisticated devices that outlived their purpose, or whose functions were no longer understood, would have been melted down for raw material. It was obvious from the rest of the stuff on the wreck that this was from the classical world, but the gear wheels were not known from the classical world, and it was then that they'd realized that this particular piece of bronze was something special. The crucible was the destiny of a lot of ancient brilliance. To a metalworker who did not know what it was for, a precision-machined astronomical computer looks exactly the same thing as a broken bronze statue. Useful weight, nothing more. Or maybe similar mechanisms have survived but have not been recognized. The Antikythera mechanism itself sat in a crate for 2 years before anyone noticed it had gears. Other corroded lumps in museum storerooms might be hiding similar surprises that nobody has thought to look at. Imagine how many shelves and how many institutions hold objects that were cataloged in a hurry a century ago by people who did not know what they were looking at. The 2024 finds opened a fourth possibility. The Antikythera ship was carrying more than one mechanism. Think about what that would mean. A vessel loaded with the most valuable artifacts of Greek civilization, statues worth fortunes, luxury goods bound for the wealthiest patrons of Rome, would not have carried a single astronomical device by accident. If the mechanism was on board, it was there because somebody valued it, and if somebody valued one mechanism, they may have valued others. The second debris field is unexplored. The main site has not been fully excavated. Bronze fragments keep emerging that do not match any known artifact category. The researchers are being careful.
They are not claiming a second mechanism. They are not speculating in public about what the unidentified artifacts might be. But the language they chose was chosen carefully. If what they pulled out of the seabed in 2024 turns out to be technological rather than artistic, the implications are enormous. One mechanism is an anomaly. Two would be evidence of an industry, a tradition of sophisticated mechanical engineering in the ancient world, almost entirely lost, that produced multiple devices for multiple patrons, employing multiple craftsmen. It would mean a tradition that we have somehow missed for over a century, despite holding the only known example in our hands. What else have we missed? What comes next? The Antikythera wreck has been teaching us things we did not know for over a century. In 1900, it taught us that ancient ships could carry treasures of extraordinary value across dangerous waters. In 1902, it taught us that ancient craftsmen could build machines of impossible sophistication. In 2005, it taught us that those machines encoded astronomical knowledge that would not be rediscovered in Europe for over a millennium. Each generation of technology, from helmet and hose diving to scuba to the exosuit, has revealed aspects of the wreck that previous generations could not access. The 2024 excavation is the next step. The exosuit lets archaeologists work the site with precision impossible for any previous expedition. The second debris field opens territory that has never been systematically explored. The artifacts coming up are filling gaps in our understanding of what the ship carried and why somebody was moving it. What we do not yet know is whether the most significant discovery is still waiting. Think about the pattern. The Antikythera Mechanism was overlooked for 2 years after its recovery. It sat in a crate, corroded and unrecognizable, while archaeologists focused on the statues. Only when Stace cleaned it off did anyone realize what it was. The artifacts recovered in 2024 are still being analyzed. The objects under further study have not been publicly identified. The second debris field has not been fully excavated. Somewhere in that material, in fragments already on the surface or in the debris still on the seabed, there may be answers to questions the field has been asking for a century. Was the mechanism unique, or was it one example of a broader technological tradition? What else was that ship carrying that we have not yet recognized? Who built these devices? And what happened to the knowledge that created them? The research team is working. The analysis is ongoing. The publications will come. But the trajectory of this story suggests that the most important revelation is rarely the first. The statues were obvious. The mechanism was hidden. The human remains were unexpected. The second debris field was unknown. Each excavation has revealed something previous expeditions missed. The 2024 finds are continuing that pattern.
Somewhere in the objects, now in laboratories in Athens and Geneva, or still on the seabed off Point Glyphadia, waiting for the next generation of technology to reach them. The next revelation is taking shape. The Antikythera wreck sank 2,000 years ago, carrying a cargo we still do not fully understand. The mechanism changed everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. What comes next may change it again. If you want to be there when it does, subscribe so the next update reaches you the moment the publications drop. Drop a comment below with your theory. If you think the wreck was war loot from Sulla's sack of Athens, say so. If you think it was a private collection bound for a Roman villa, say so. And if you think the next excavation season is going to pull a second mechanism off that seabed, say it loudly. The researchers will not confirm anything until the publications are ready. But the language has already been chosen. The objects have already been recovered. And history, as the Antikythera wreck keeps proving, does not always release its secrets all at once. For more than a century, the mechanism was the answer. Now, for the first time, it may be turning back into a question. A question about what else was in that cargo. A question about what else was on that ship.
A question about what else the ancient world built, and we have simply not found yet. Think about how rare that is. In most fields, the great questions get answered and stay answered. The discoveries narrow over time, sharpening into footnotes. Antikythera does the opposite. Every generation that comes back to it pulls something up that opens the picture wider. The statues opened it. The mechanism opened it. The Hercules head opened it. The bones opened it. The second debris field opened it. The objects requiring further analysis are about to open it again. The seabed off Point Glyphadia has held its silence for 2,000 years. It is being asked again now, with better tools, by a generation of researchers who have already begun pulling answers from the deep that nobody expected to see. The next pull may be the one that rewrites the textbooks for good.